haven't painted in about a week, and so I've been really feeling inspired to paint more and more every day lately, and I wanted to make an abstract painting. So in this video, I thought I would kind of share some of the process behind making an abstract. If you're a beginner, this will help you, so you'll learn how to make an abstract painting, starting from the beginning to the end. I'm going to go through all the steps of the process. But if you're also a painter who has already tried abstract painting and you want to improve your skills, this video will also help you, because I'm going to go over all the principles of abstract painting, the fundamental things that you need to know. We're going to discuss the techniques and tools that will make your painting better and will take your work to the next level. First off, there are a wide variety of different types of abstract paintings. In this video, I'm going to paint a non-representational abstract. You can see the start of it back there. It was actually a tutorial painting that I made for several tutorials. There's little sections of paint. None of it goes together. It's similar colors, but I didn't start this thinking that I was going to make an abstract painting out of it. I started it really just for a lot of different painting tutorials to teach people basic skills. And if you want to watch some of those tutorials, I've linked in the description a whole playlist of how to have the basic skills of acrylic painting, like blending colors, making flat areas of color, thickening your paint, everything that you need to know about starting to learn to use acrylics in painting, because that's the medium that I'm going to be working with today is acrylics, but you can use these tips for oil painting as well. So it's not medium specific, but if you are wanting to know the exact kind of paint I'm using, it will be acrylics. But the thing is that there is non-representational abstract, kind of like what you can see back there on that easel. And then there are representational abstracts, like you can see above me there with the animals. And so I make animal paintings in bright colors, and I abstract the form, the shape of it, as well as the colors. You've also probably come across abstract landscapes or abstract flowers. These are very common ways to abstract something in the representational world, and they're really popular. I love abstract landscapes. But today I'm focusing on a non-representational abstract, and I define this by something that's not actually supposed to look like a particular object. But with a non-representational abstract, I think it's really important to communicate a feeling or a vibe or the essence of an experience, but you communicate it without words. Instead, you use colors, shapes, lines, composition. All of these things are a way to express that communication of the essence of that moment, whatever it is that you are trying to express with your abstract painting. When making non-representational abstracts, I think it's so important to go into it knowing what the feeling or vibe is that you want to have the viewer experience when they look at your piece, because nothing is worse than seeing an abstract painting that makes you feel nothing, right? Like you want to feel something from it. That's the beauty of abstract work. So for me, for this piece, I've already got a lot of blues and purples and a little bit of dark green in there. And so for me, already my piece is starting to kind of have a calming feeling, because color really helps us send a message to the viewer. So calming colors are things like blue and purple, and more activating energy colors are more like yellow and orange. And so combining these in very strategic ways can help you communicate a calm feeling or an uplifting feeling. And that is what I'm going for in my piece today. A little bit of calmness and a little bit of activated, uplifting energy. I want to show you my color wheel over here. It kind of has my lamp in front of it, so you'll have to ignore that. But you can still see that the blue and green and purple are on the opposite side of orange, yellow orange, and red orange. So my thought with my piece is that primarily what I'm going to have the colors be are on this side, but then I'm going to have a little dash of something like yellow orange or orange. We'll see how it goes. I like to try things out as I'm painting to see exactly what color looks best. But what I found that works really great when you are making an abstract painting is to have a lot of similar colors and then just little splashes of accent colors from the opposite side of the color wheel. It's also a good idea to have a compositional layout in mind ahead of time prior to ever starting painting. Now, I already have some marks on here. Like I said, these were left over from some tutorials that I did, but what I'm going to do is show you with my pencil. I wouldn't suggest necessarily drawing your compositional layout on there. It's better to just have the idea in your head, I think, so that way you don't have to cover up the pencil marks. But the thing is that I'm trying to show you this in the tutorial, so we're going to just make some marks here. This is called a cruciform layout. So the idea here is to basically make a cross, but you can make it of different sizes and you can make them look interesting, right? And you can see how this looks like a cross in here. And then the idea is to make different colors on different areas. So you could either have lighter colors in these squares on the edges, and then a darker color as the cross in the middle, or you could have darker colors in the edges and lighter colors here in the middle as the cross. This allows you to build into your design something that will be seen from far away. Because this is one of the common mistakes that I see people make who are just starting out with abstracts. They just put a lot of stuff on there, kind of abstract expressionism style, where they're just like making so many marks, and it just looks like a mess. When you are standing far away from it, it all kind of goes together, and there's nothing that really grabs you. But if you start out with a compositional design ahead of time, then you can go into it knowing that from a distance, when you have these different contrasting areas of color, there will be something that grabs the viewer, and then you can add more details later. And even though I have like all of these different design elements already on there, I can either just cover those up, or I can allow them to show through as different layers in the piece, because layers are very important to add dimension and texture to an abstract painting, and we're going to get to that more here in just a little bit. I'm going to use some of the colors that I was using before in the tutorials, but I'm also going to use some titanium white. I really like Payne's gray. I use some of the Mars black and Naples yellow. I like to add some muted colors into my abstracts. It can't all be saturated. Well, it can be, but if it is all saturated, it won't look as good. And so I'm going to use some of this yellow probably, and maybe some of this teal. I don't know. I like to lay out a lot of different options just to see if there is something that I really like. Of course, I have to use some dioxazine purple and some cyan. I love the Dick Blick Artist Acrylics and Liquitex heavy body paints. If you can use those, they're better, but I'm also using like some of the Liquitex Basics paint because I had used those in the tutorial, and I'm just gonna show you that I can do it with just about any kind of paint. And I'm gonna mix a lot of the paint with the heavy gloss gel medium. I'm also going to put on some gloves before I get any more into it, so I don't like getting paint on my hands. I like to mix up a lot of white with the heavy gloss gel medium. This way I can mix it with the other colors, and it helps to make your colors lighter. I like to paint with a lot of pastel tints of my colors. It's just kind of part of my style. Kind of put out little piles of the white. I added a little bit of my Naples yellow into the blue over here just to make a tint that's a little bit warmer. I find that if you mix a little bit of the yellows into some of the other colors, it helps the painting just really go together in a nice way. The colors really fit. And it gives you variety, and you want variety in your different colors. That shows an advanced level of color theory. You're going to see as we do this, it's going to really make a variety in the colors. Now, some of them look kind of drab. Like this looks a little drab compared to the other colors, kind of brownish, but that's just fine. Once it gets on the canvas, it's going to look awesome. And I mix different colors as I'm painting too. I don't use a completely closed palette. That's what this is called when you mix all the colors ahead of time. But I like to get a good idea of what the colors are going to be, because it helps me know that before I even start painting, my colors are going to go together really well. And I like to have that confidence when I'm going into it, so that way I can just let go and get into the mark making of the abstract painting rather than being so concerned with the colors matching. I just love this golden teal. It's so fun to work with, but it is a little toxic. It says so on the back, so you want to be careful if you're going to use that. Definitely wear gloves when you're working with it. Golden paint is highly pigmented. See, I made it a lot thicker by adding in the medium there. What I want to do now is make some tones. So tints are the lighter colors. Tones are if you add gray, and this is Payne's gray that I'm opening up here. I love making tones with the Payne's gray. It looks black when it comes out of the container, but it isn't. It lightens up pretty quick when you add it to stuff. But you do want to add carefully. You can always add a little white to your tints. I like to make sure that going into it, I have a variety of different tints, tones, and shades of each color, because you want to make sure you have good contrast in your piece. I think this yellow is going to look really nice as an accent color. You can kind of see when you look at the other colors how it all goes together well. I'm going to lay out a little orange on my palette just in case, so that I can get an idea of what that would look like, because it also looks very nice. You see it next to all the other colors. And I knew it would, because these were on the opposite side of the color wheel. It's okay if you mix colors together a little bit. It'll make your painting better. So this is what I'm going to start out with my colors. Let me see, make sure you can see my entire palette there. Now to start adding some color, I'm just using a very thick, big brush. This thing is well used. You can use a new brush if you'd like, whatever, because you don't need to have something great detail oriented when you are putting big areas of color on. It's just mainly you're getting the colors on there. I also like to use a palette knife to apply color in this stage. So we're going to use both. And what I've decided is make the corners the darker colors and then the lighter colors in the middle. And what I want to do is add some different types of color in here. So see, you have that one, but then I'm also adding some white in there with it. And it's fun to add like really thick areas in different places. It doesn't have to look perfect at this stage. In fact, it's better if it doesn't. Actually going to move my easel down a little bit so I can get to this top area easier. I have a really nice crank easel. It allows me to move this up and down without having to lift it. If you'd like to know more about the easel I'm using, I've put a link to it in the description as well. I want to leave some of these drips in here to show through a little bit because I liked the way those looked. I like using drips in my work. Oh, maybe I'll do a little bit dash of this orange in here. The thing is that you just want to play when you're first starting out with these pieces. You don't have to be too serious about it. Just put some color on there and see how it feels. It will change as you're working. And it doesn't have to be anything really skilled. You know, you don't have to be really perfect with how you have the marks. You kind of know what areas were going to be, in general, certain types of color, but it doesn't have to really stay that way. And it's better if it doesn't. It's better if it looks messy. And also during the stage while your paint is still wet, if you're painting with acrylics, you need to do it now rather than waiting. If you're painting with oils, you can wait. But I would make some marks on here, like with your palette knife, just and see how this stuff shows through. And just do interesting things with it, right? Like just get crazy with it. It doesn't need to be good. It's better if it's not. You could do circles, you can do squiggly lines, whatever you want to do. Just rough it up a little bit. Doing this will give it a lot of texture later. What I like to do is along these areas here where I was having some of the colors go together, I find a color that's kind of close and I do a little blending with it because this makes it just more interesting. You want to have sharp edges and blended areas, but when you're laying on these initial colors, it's the easiest to do blended areas now. So I like to add some of that in there. And I don't worry about the colors really matching or any of that stuff because I've already worked some of that out in the mixing stage. And if you want, you can use a smaller brush. I like to use a bigger brush during this stage just to give a really nice atmospheric, flowy feel to the different colors of paint I'm putting together. You want to make sure to add some pops of color too. And there were already some, so I'm just going to accentuate some of the pops of color that were already on there. If you can, paint on the edges at this stage also, because then you won't have to paint the edges later. I like to find ways to make my painting more efficient. Because really, I mean, I don't know if most of you are trying to do this as a living, but if you are, then efficiency is important, because the more work you can do in a limited amount of time, the better, the more that you can produce and the more money that you can make. So I just have fun making paintings fast when I'm making abstracts. To see a transformation, a very quick one. I want to show some of these through, so I'm going to scrape some of this stuff off. And then you can take some of that paint and smear it other places. You don't have to waste it, because this is part of what makes it interesting. And this will take your abstract paintings to the next level if you start to be fearless about the way that you apply color and the way that you take the color away. I mixed up a little more of a gray tone because I thought some of these areas really need that. I've got a lot of saturation in my colors, and I want to make sure I have a little more neutrals throughout, because neutrals help calm the eye. And although you can paint with completely saturated colors everywhere, your painting will look a little more purposeful if you have some more neutral colors in there. It'll just seem like you knew what you were doing a little bit more with the color. Because that's kind of a beginner mistake, is to just put all saturated colors. And as I say that, if you've seen my other work, my animal work, you see that there are almost all bright colors. And that's a choice that I'm making. And you can always make those as an artist. You can do whatever you want. So I want to have like a little bit of saturated colors in an area. And this might change how I've displayed it, but it'll be a focal point. And to have the most saturated points near the middle, or maybe like over here, they always say that in the thirds is a great way. But with the cruciform, I found that having something near the middle, but not exactly in the middle, is better, because all these areas are leading the eye to it. So it's reinforcing your focal point. We got to make this look more interesting, because right now it's not. I also think it's a good idea at this point to think about the amount of black or dark colors that you have in here, because dark colors help add contrast, and you want to add contrast to your piece in interesting ways. Really, it's just a process of adding layers and continuing to add layers. I like to step back from it every once in a while and see how it looks, and then start to add more. Sometimes it's good to let it dry too if it's getting difficult to work with and the layers are starting to kind of mold into each other too much. I'm used to working wet on wet in acrylics, and if you're using oils, you're always going to be working this way. It's always going to be wet, I guess, unless you allow it to dry for a really long time. The one thing with working with a composition ahead of time that you might encounter, and this piece is at this stage now, which is why I'm mentioning it, is that it looks a little forced, right? You have these specific areas and it's just kind of static. And so that's where adding more layers in a very deliberate way is going to help you activate this. And so some of these I can't scrape off anymore because they're dried already, which is why I was like, if you're going to do scraping, do it near the beginning of your piece if you're working in acrylics. You want to make sure some stuff just goes off the edges, because this way it doesn't look like you're just only painting in the edges. And later some of this might be covered up. You don't have to make this many lines, but what I've discovered is that if I make a lot of them, I cover them up, and then some of them still end up showing through. What I want to do right now too is work with the palette knife a little bit more and add some chunky marks with some colors, some of the really saturated colors. And this is just kind of scumbling with the palette knife. You're just using the flat side and sliding it along. Maybe I can make this one look a little bit better too, because it was just, I don't know, kind of boring. Part of making abstract work is the process. It's letting yourself go. Just adding paint and seeing what that message inside of you is going to be able to come out by doing this. And as you make more paintings, you'll get an idea for what people feel when they see things in your work, and when you make marks a specific way, and what you feel from it. Because everybody is going to feel something a little bit different. I like to blend some of it in, make layers that just look really nice and like clouds or airy. So it's fun. And that also lends to the calming feel that I'm going for. But I'm not afraid to allow the colors to just kind of blend together. And as you see, whenever I mix them on the palette, I already had some of that. So as I'm doing this on the canvas, basically using the canvas as a palette, it's just fine. And it goes together because I already had the start of that. And if you lose a little bit of the cruciform or whatever different composition that you decided, if you lose a little bit of it, it's fine. When you're blending all this stuff together, you can either bring it back in or leave it, because if it looks good and it communicates what you're trying to communicate and it loses a little bit of the original underlayer that you started with, that's just fine. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. This thing is going to progress. I have fun trying to mix different colors as I'm painting, just to see what it's going to feel like on here. And sometimes I'll cover these areas up. But if I like a color that I mix together, I might take it to another area and add some there as well, because this will give continuity to the piece if you have similar colors scattered throughout. And also it shows that you kind of have a more advanced level or understanding of color theory. And I don't know if that really matters, but to the average person who's buying your work, it probably doesn't. But I think subconsciously they can tell. The viewer knows if the piece looks like a beginner made it. Like, let's say a 5-year-old made a painting like this, they're going to know that it looks different if they compare that 5-year-old's abstract to someone who actually has a handle on color theory. They're going to be able to tell that an artist actually made it. And that's how you can level up your work. Because a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, my 5-year-old could make something like that. Well, I mean, they might make something that looks like a mess, but they're not going to make something with composition and color theory. They don't know what that is. You can see I'm starting to add little areas of color to pull the eye around. I like to have similar kind of areas of color, and then over here, and then have some over here as well. Different types of mark making, but similar levels of value. And then periodically I go through and show some of the under layers. And you don't only have to do straight lines. I mean, you could do circles, all sorts of things in this. And we're going to add some more different types of shapes here in a minute. I like to kind of start out with this first, just to see how it feels before I start adding in a bunch of other shapes. Because shapes can have a lot of visual weight. I mean, there's a lot of shapes in here already, but so far I've kind of made them organic, but similar to where they're kind of sort of square-like, but not quite squares, because that matches the cruciform design layout. But it might be fun to do something like some little circles. And it's interesting with color with the circles, because you know, you can make them look like an animal print or maybe something else organic, but it adds an area of interest to the piece, something that it didn't have before. And the idea is to put these in places where you want to add interest and where it's looking a little boring, because a lot of these areas so far are kind of like, I don't know, there's not anything defining them in my piece. And so this is allowing me to have something else there. And it's a little bit different than what is arranged in other areas of my painting, which is good and bad. You don't want to only have one area of circles. I think it's good to have more areas, but maybe do them in a different color. If you don't like something, you can always just remove it, so you're not stuck with it. I'm doing some a little bit bigger ones just to see what it looks like. I don't know if I have my heart set on it yet, honestly. Might be competing too much with my focal point. But like I said, if you don't like it, just wipe it off. You don't have to keep it. And if you let it dry, just paint over it. It doesn't have to stay there. I love how you can get into doing an abstract, and it's quite relaxing. For me, it just takes away all of the worries and the stresses that I have going on in my life. So I love making abstracts. There's no pressure to make it look like anything. And honestly, anything that you do is perfect, because it's an abstract. It can be anything. Now, what I like to do is take some of the color and add some of these lighter colors up into some of these other areas, even though we had decided that the middle part would be, well, the cruciform area would be the lighter colors and these would be darker. You can see if you layer like yellow on top of one of these darker colors, it's not going to be as bright as what's in the center, so it's not going to take away from that, but it helps unify everything. And unification of your piece is very important. You want to have it to where the colors all just vibe. And in order to do that, you got to be thinking about spreading the colors out throughout the whole thing. And this is just something that just takes practice to figure out and to have kind of this intuition about where they need to go. And if you don't know, just start adding some stuff. Because that's how I do it. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. What it is now is certainly not what it's going to be in an hour from now. But I can tell when it starts to become something. And you'll be able to see that too and feel that in your work. I kind of feel like I want to put some bigger area of yellow through here. I don't know if I'm going to completely like the way it is, but I just kind of thought it needed something else. I think that does look good. And that's kind of how I make a lot of my pieces. I go and I look at them and I'm like, what does it need? How does it feel? Right? What I really like is the way the colors feel up there. So I want to make some of that energy come throughout other sections of the piece. But the thing is that a lot of these areas are really thick and I'm trying to wait for them to dry. So I'm trying to work on some of these other things and allow those to dry a little bit. And if you are working with oils, you might not be able to ever allow anything to dry. But with acrylics, that's one of the advantages to acrylics. And I love painting with acrylics because of that, because you can let one area dry while you're working on another area. So I'm opening my window because I'm trying to paint without my air filter so that way you wouldn't hear it, but the paint smell in here is just getting too much. So I'm hoping that it doesn't hurt the sound quality too bad, but I gotta do what I gotta do for my health, so. I think it's fun to add little marks because it gives little details. And on first glance, people might not see them from a distance, but when they start getting closer, they'll see these little marks. They're fun. I like to find ways that I can add patterned areas into things. And I like to find parts to where I made some marks that I can fill in and make new shapes. It's fun to do. It reminds me kind of coloring when I was a kid. So maybe that's why I like it, because I used to love to color a lot. You can see as I build up layers, it really starts to look cool. I feel like these areas through here need something else. They're still a little wet, so I've been trying to let them dry. It's hard to make layers on top of wet parts, especially if you want it to stay the new color and not mix in. I've discovered that as I've been doing this, the main idea is just to add some of the same colors in lots of different areas. And this at least makes the marks that you are making look purposeful. Even if you didn't quite have any thought behind what you were doing when you were making them, later it will feel purposeful. I'm blending the color by doing a little scumbling with a slightly damp brush. What I need to do is add some more color down here, because too much contrast near the edge just pulls your eye out of it. I just got too much down here. It's okay to have a little bit, but I have too much. It needs to be more blended too. Blending the colors together helps get rid of some of that contrast. It doesn't have to be perfectly blended. It can just be kind of haphazard. If you notice, as you add more layers, it really starts to vibe. It's part of why I love making abstracts, is that you don't know what you're going to get when you start. You just start. It's kind of like life, right? We don't know what life is going to bring us. You just have to start. Just go through each day. Do the best you can. Have an overarching goal, like spreading calmness and good vibes, but you don't know if it's going to work out. You just got to keep going on it. I'm going to add some more circles in here, because the thing is, there's not quite enough. It's too different. You need to have it all go together. So I thought maybe I could add something over here. Orange to catch the eye. It's okay to leave some of the circles looking kind of unfinished. And that one, I like how this looks. I might just wipe it away. And this is another way to add dimension. You can just dab a paper towel on there and it creates different types of textures. Anything you can do to add a bit of interest for the viewer, just a bit of detail. I like to not just have one focal point, but have several. And so this area up here is going to be also a focal point. You want to have your primary focal point, but then have some secondary ones, because having only one focal point is boring. If there's any message that I can give throughout this tutorial, is you don't want it to be boring. Abstract art is supposed to be fun for the creator and fun for the viewer. And so more focal points are, well, they're more work for the artist to create, but I look at it as they're more fun to make, really. But they're more fun for the viewer, which is the most important point. I'll go back over this and kind of reinforce that. Now that some of these layers are drying, it's a little bit easier for me to do this. I still need something more in the middle. I don't like the way my main focal point looks, but I'm trying to let it dry more. We're going to see if I can start going in and adding a little bit of something. Since I have these lines, I kind of started them just from another tutorial, but I decided to carry that through in the rest of the piece. Because once you have an element in one location, you should try to repeat it elsewhere. This will give a cohesive feel to your piece. I want to try to finish this today. So I keep working. Sometimes I'll do a couple days on an abstract, sometimes just one day. I like the aspect of direct painting where you're painting wet on wet in acrylics. So when you are just painting, it's all in the flow. There's just something about that. I like how the pieces turn out. And it feels like it's a record of my experience for that couple of hours on that day. I'm gonna add some paint in a few areas with my palette knife. Palette knife makes different marks than the paintbrush does, so it's fun to have a variety of different types of marks. Yeah, I don't really like the way this one is, so I'm gonna get rid of that. It's not quite what I'm looking for. I liked the other ones, but there's such a color contrast and you don't want that everywhere. What I want to do is add some more white through the middle. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to do until you just kind of start to do it. There, I like that. I'd do that somewhere else too. Like I said, you want to copy areas and have similar vibes elsewhere so that there's some unity to it. But you don't want too much repetition, otherwise it looks too forced. So I would say if you're making areas of similar things, like I'm doing these kind of dots, just do them sparingly and then step back from it and see what it feels like. It's all about balance, especially with the cruciform, because it's sort of balanced anyway, being a cross. So you want it balanced, but you want it to feel activated in some way. Don't be afraid to take stuff all the way off the edge. It might not look good. Like, I don't know if that looked so good. I'm gonna remove that. But it's good to try because you don't want the piece to look like it's all in the center. Well, this is dried a little bit. I'm going to add just a little more of the yellow here. A couple of these spots. Because I want it to kind of pop a little more like that side is. And it depends when you're layering colors. They dry, and as they dry, they change. So sometimes it takes another layer to get everything just the way you want it to be. And it's also good to have areas that are kind of just blended for the eye to rest. So that's kind of what I'm doing here in this middle part around the main focal point. You don't always have to do that. You don't always have to have an area around the main focal point. But it's working out for me in this piece, so I'm leaving it. I also like to have a lot of the areas where it's going off the edge of the canvas to look kind of blended, to where it's not super contrasting in saturation. This just helps keep your eye where you want it to go. And it's always good to take a step back and look at your painting from time to time to assess the changes that you've made and if they're looking good or not. If you feel like it's unbalanced in some way, adding more contrast in another area, it's a good way to pull the eye back. And a big glob of white will do it. You just need to make it look purposeful. Might need a little more white over here, but I'm almost finished with it. I'm real satisfied with how this piece has turned out. I didn't know how it was gonna go since I'm doing the tutorial while I was making it. I've never done this before. Make an abstract while I was doing a tutorial and talking at the same time throughout the whole thing. So, it's my little version of Bob Ross. Bob Ross abstract style. Sometimes the finishing little touches take a bit of thought and feel. You step back, you look, you see what you could do. liked the idea of maybe putting something darker through here, but I don't want it to be as dark as these, so I don't want it to really divide my piece up. But just enough to add a little something there, right? Just a little hint. These are the types of details that at the very end you can feel that they might need it. It helps you tell a story a little bit with your piece. This is just a little bit too dark. I can tone that down a tad. That's better. That's where we're at. Looking good. I'm really happy with how it turned out. And if you'd like to watch me making some of my other paintings, you can check out my vlog playlist here. There are lots of really chill vlogs of me painting animals and different things. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.